Hello guys, I'm very happy that you liked the introductory video that I made to the study of English literature. This is an introductory video to the study of literary theory. I suppose you know that literary theory came into being as a discipline sometime in the middle of the 20th century. But the ideas that contributed to literary theory can be dated back to the 19th century itself. You know that humanism started with the Renaissance, and in the 16th century, there was a new interest in the human being, a new interest in human emotions and ideas, in human values, a new interest in education and literature. All that came into being. Humanism became the main force of Western civilization in the 16th, 17th, and even 18th, 19th centuries. In the 17th century, there was the new impetus or the new focus given on reason by people like René Descartes. And in the 18th century, this gave rise to the neoclassical period or the Augustan period, at which time there was a lot of brilliant prose as well as poetry written. It was an urban aristocratic culture that flourished at that time. And in the 19th century, there was the importance given to emotions, subjectivity, imagination. All these are various aspects of the human being, various aspects of humanism. It is in the middle of the 19th century that a lot of things happened that the humanist turn of Western civilization gave way to new beginnings, to a new perception on literature and life. What happened in the 19th century like that? In the 18th century, there was the agricultural revolution, which was the result of agricultural implements being discovered and invented, and enclosure farming started. A lot of poor people lost their homes. They had to move to other places so that big enclosure farms could be started. Poor people had to move away and they lived in places which became towns. In these towns, around these towns, industries came into being because industries drew upon the cheap labor in these towns. At this time in the 19th century, there was the rise of technology and innovation. There was the coming of the steam engine, the railways. There was the coming of the blast furnace. There was the coming of the textile industry because of the discovery of the invention of the spinning mill. So slowly the rise of technology and innovation gave rise to industries. And in the middle of the 19th century, this gave rise to what is called Industrial Revolution. Industrial Revolution changed Western civilization, Western society completely. In the Industrial Revolution, there was the beginning of mass production. People made things by hand and sold personally to other people, to their customers before, but now mass production started. The focus is not on the producer at all now. The focus is on the product and on consumption. Slowly, this would lead to capitalism and late capitalism as we know it today, etc. The great achievements of Britain in the Industrial Revolution, Britain was the leader in the Industrial Revolution in Europe. The achievements of Britain in the Industrial Revolution were showcased in the Great Exhibition of London of 1851. It happened in the Crystal Palace at Hyde Park, a newly constructed building, which is now a place, it's like a museum or where lots of shows and things happen these days. In those days, Queen Victoria opened the Great Exhibition of London there. All the different achievements of Britain, not only in Britain, but also in its colonies were showcased there. And also Britain also showed how undeveloped countries like India, Turkey, etc. are, Egypt, etc. are, that also. This was actually a way of showcasing their achievements in colonialism and buttressing their power, to reinforce their power. They used this Great Exhibition of London. It brought Britain a lot of money also. This was the time when the British Empire was slowly getting shaken because of Indian First War of Independence, Indian Rebellion, which they called Sepoy Mutiny. In Ireland also, there was the Home Rule movement. Ireland did not get independence immediately, but the Home Rule movement shook the British Empire a little bit. And within England also, within Britain also, there were lots of movements like the Chartist movement, the Great Reform Acts. British culture and society was undergoing massive upheavals. Major upheavals were happening at this time. Parliamentary reforms were sought, and more people were getting voting rights, which was to the disconcertment or to the irritation of a lot of people, including Matthew Arnold. Everybody in England, even the great thinkers, did not like the fact that working classes and poor people would get voting rights. Who are they to decide the government like that, they thought. This was also a time when England was torn apart by, England and Europe was torn apart by major wars, like the Boer Wars were there, the Crimean Wars were there. This is therefore a time when society underwent a lot of changes. In short, the Industrial Revolution led to bourgeois materialism, bourgeois values, middle class values. Remember, this is also the time of Charles Darwin publishing his Origin of Species, 1859. There were other major thinkers who churned the Western society like Marx, Karl Marx, Sigmund Freud. They completely changed the perception of human reality, human society, human being. You know, Friedrich Nietzsche was another thinker like that. Karl Marx proved that society is not what it seems. Society is not ordained by God to be in this manner. It is actually the result of class struggle. Sigmund Freud showed that human beings are all products of repressed desires and problems in their subconscious mind. So the perception of reality, the perception of human being and what is truth, what is justice, all this is changing at this time. Incidentally, in the 19th century, at the end of the 19th century, this is also the time of realism. In France, realism started, and the depiction of reality as it is led to looking at why things happen rather than what. Eventually, realism itself gave way to modernism, looking at why things happen in this manner, why human beings behave in this manner. There were also philosophies related to Darwinism, like naturalism, positivism. They gave these philosophies, philosophical approaches, gave importance to the situations in which people live, the experience of the world. You know, people are not born with a soul. They don't come to this world with all the tabula rasa, with all the characteristics that they have. They don't come into this world like that easily. Rather, people are products of their environment. You know, people's experience is what decides what they are. These ideas, Freud, Marx, Nietzsche, Auguste Comte, who talked about positivism, then empiricism, which was itself a British philosophy, all these theories underscore the idea that human being is a construct. Human being is not what he seems. Many writers at this time, like Mallarmé, Stendhal, Marcel Proust, they were also depicting human beings as fractured, as not so unified, as in a state of formation or becoming, right? And bourgeois values were rooted in capitalism. Bourgeois values like materialism, commodification abounded at this time. Everything was looked upon like a commodity. Everything was looked upon with a scientific approach, feelings and relationships, all these began to be undervalued. In short, there was a kind of dehumanization at the beginning of the 20th century. A kind of dehumanization. Human being lost his value or her value. This was accentuated. This became worse because of the First World War and after that the Second World War. The First World War was a war that was meant to end all wars. It was therefore called the Great War. But it was only the beginning. There was so much destruction, absurd destruction and death associated with the First World War. In the First World War, people did not know how to fight. All these new guns and things had come at that time. Long distance, long range shooting started at that time, and they didn't know how to do it. They just would run straight at the enemy and would get shot down. And trench fighting was such a horrible thing. People died in the trenches because of poisoning and pollution, and because water filled in the trenches and they got blood poisoning and other diseases. That is how they died, many of them. Such an absurd war it was. Any war is absurd. The First and Second World Wars were the greatest disasters that humanity could ever bring upon itself. And at this time, along with the First World War, just after the First World War, there was also the Great Depression. The Great Depression is the fall of the stock market, and there was such a devaluation of money and human life at that time. People lost their jobs. In America especially, where people were on cloud nine thinking American dream is going to work out, America is going to get success, America will be on the top of the world. That is what they thought at this time in the 1930s. But what happened is exactly the opposite, the failure of the American dream because of the stock market crash. You can see that in plays like Death of a Salesman. And this great trauma of the First World War and the Great Depression is what immediately gave rise to modernist literature. Modernism is a theory, but at that time, modernism was in literature, a kind of writing, fragmented, questioning reality, exploring the subconscious mind and psychology more than external reality, delving into character rather than plot, employing Freudian understandings of the human being in literature, looking at how language is insufficient or inefficient in depicting human experience, the breaking down of language, the incapacity of language to express our mind. All these are part of modernist literature. Eventually, all this, entered literary theory as well. So in modernism and literature of this time, there's a great deal of questioning of reality. There's a lot of irrationality, a lot of fragmentation, a lot of alternate realities explored, and so on and so forth. Instead of talking in a very literal manner, they began to talk through symbols. That started in the Romantic period itself. So all these were changes in literature, which eventually led to changes in perceptions or philosophy, changes in literary theory. People began to understand that reality is multiple and plural. People began to understand that the reality should not be understood just from one perspective. There should be multiple perspectives. Many-voiced reality, many-voicedness should be there. Many critics said this in different ways. And Nietzsche famously said, what is important is not facts, but interpretations. What is important is not reality or truth or fact, but interpretations. History also began to be questioned at this time, because history is also not one monolithic story or fact. History is just a text written by different people at different times to show power in different ways. And power, I've just mentioned power. That became the main thing in literary theory. All literary theories look at the various ways in which power works on the human being. Power is worked out in human societies in different ways. How power determines the nature of a literary text. These are the very basic principles of literary theories. The first literary theory proper was structuralism. Structuralism drew upon modernist literature and literature and art of the previous age quite a lot. Structuralism proved that everything is a construct. Language constructs our reality. There are no essential meanings. You understand? Everything is attributed. Meanings are all attributed. And how they are attributed, etc. That is under the purview of structuralism in greater detail in the works of Roland Barthes and Claude Lévi-Strauss. How culture creates meanings, how in anthropology meanings get created, etc. And how in literature, through underlying structures, how meanings emerge. All these things they talked about. This is only an introductory video. I'm not going to teach any of these literary theories. And structuralism was highly anti-essentialist. Structuralists did not believe in given meanings inside a text or inside an event. All meanings are attributed. They are not essentially there. And even though structuralism believed in anti-essentialism, structuralism still held on to some essential ideas. Structuralism still believed in center, and structuralism still believed that even though meanings are not there, they can be attributed. Such problems within structuralism led to the emergence of post-structuralism in the hands of Derrida, who to begin with a structuralist, in the hands of Roland Barthes, who was also to begin with a structuralist. And post-structuralism became like a common theory that fed a lot of other theories. Along with post-structuralism, there was also postmodernism. When modernism was mostly a movement in art and literature, postmodernism was pakka theory only. And postmodernism believed that there is no unity possible. There is no center possible. Unity, center, these are all myths. We don't need them. A single unified meaning is a myth. Let us have multiple meanings. Let us have plural voices. Postmodernism celebrates fragmentation. It doesn't try to bring any unity at all. Think of literary works of Salman Rushdie or Gabriel Garcia Marquez, etc. When you study literary theory, always remember to read up on related texts and artworks along with it. Without the illustration of these theoretical ideas in literature and art, you cannot completely understand the literary theory. You can do that yourself. You don't need me or anybody else. You can look up. That is how many of us learned. I studied like that. I learned like that. When you think of formalism, what is formalist art? How is formalism seen in art? Read up on it. Look up art, futuristic art, etc. Like that. And post-structuralism and postmodernism became umbrella terms that influenced new kinds of Marxism, new kinds of feminism. Post-colonialism was also influenced by it. New historicism was influenced by it. Reader response theory was influenced by it. So these many different theories all believe that reality is a construct. These days, they believe that reality is not a given thing. It is multiple, it is plural, it is ever changing. And, they look at how meanings convey power relations. Meanings ultimately carry the mechanisms of power within them. So literary theory is not about facts, but about interpretations. It's called the interpretive turn. And one by one, when you read all the literary theories, you will understand that they all fall into this pattern. They conform to many of these ideas. So all these together are the traditional literary theories. After the traditional literary theories, these days we have cultural studies. About all that, I will come another day with another video. I hope you liked this one. Thank you. Please like my video if you like it and share it.